I want you to think, just for a second, about the last time you felt a sudden pang of guilt. Or, maybe that totally irrational flash of ambition that just hits you out of nowhere during a boring staff meeting.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Or even that really specific kind of nervous flutter in your stomach when you first lock eyes with someone you're attracted to.
It's a very universal feeling.
It is. And
Hmm.
we usually just write these things off as personal quirks. We tell ourselves, well, it's just part of my unique personality. But, and this is what we're getting into today, what if those feelings aren't actually you?
Right. What if they're not?
What if they are this ancient inherited software and that software is just running on your very modern hardware?
It's a wild premise. I
Uh-huh.
mean, it fundamentally changes how you view, honestly, every single interaction you have, from, sitting in the boardroom to swiping on dating apps on your phone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we are unpacking that exact premise in today's deep dive. We're exploring the source material from Robert Wright's book, The Moral Animal.
Such a fascinating book.
It really is. Our mission today is to explore this new science of evolutionary psychology. We want to uncover the hidden evolutionary logic behind your daily behavior. And to do that, we're actually going to use Charles Darwin himself.
This is the best part, honestly.
Yeah. We're using his life, his morals, his rather baffling approach to romance as the ultimate test case. We want to find the puppets and the strings of human nature.
Well, and to really grasp what a massive paradigm shift this new science represents, we first have to kind of understand the old guard it was rebelling against.
Right, the old way of thinking.
Yeah. So for the better part of a century, the dominant view in the social sciences, what they call the standard social science model, was basically that the human mind is a blank slate at birth.
So just the idea that you arrive as this empty vessel and your culture, your parents, society, they just pour everything into you.
Exactly. I mean, you look at figures like Emil Durkheim, the father of modern sociology, and he argued at the turn of the century that human nature is basically just indeterminate material.
It's just a lump of clay.
Just clay. He claimed that even deeply felt primal emotions like, say, sexual jealousy or a mother's fierce love for her newborn child, he said those are entirely molded by culture.
Wow.
Yeah, they aren't biological at all. They're learned behaviors. And then, you had B.F. Skinner and the radical behaviorists.
Oh, right, the reward and punishment guy.
Exactly. They believe people basically just do what they're rewarded for doing, and they avoid what they're punished for. I mean, Skinner actually wrote this utopian novel, Walden 2, where he suggested that destructive emotions like envy and jealousy could be completely eliminated from humanity.
Completely eliminated.
Yeah, if we just conditioned children correctly from day one.
Which, I mean, when you look at the entire sweep of human history, feels incredibly naive.
Just a bit?
Like, people have been trying to eradicate jealousy and greed for thousands of years, right? Through religion, through laws, philosophy. And, well, those emotions are still driving the daily news cycle today.
They absolutely are. And that underlying reality is what sparked this quiet revolution. Beginning in, the 1960s and 70s, a new generation of evolutionary biologists and psychologists started pushing back against this blank slate idea.
They weren't buying it.
No, not at all. They introduced what's sometimes called the new Darwinian synthesis. And their core argument proposes this concept called the psychic unity of humankind.
The psychic unity, I mean, that sounds almost mystical, but it's actually grounded in hard anatomy, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yep.
It essentially means that just like natural selection designed all humans to have stomachs to digest food and, lungs to process oxygen, it also designed mental organs to solve the specific survival problems our ancestors faced.
Okay, so we all share the same baseline psychological architecture.
Precisely. We all have the same mental organs.
But wait, hold on. If we all have the exact same evolutionary hardware, like the exact same mental organs, how do you explain the sheer variety of people walking around today?
Right, the differences.
Yeah, like my neighbor is incredibly ambitious and is always seeking the spotlight, but my brother is deeply introverted and cautious. If the hardware is universal, the output shouldn't be that wildly different, right?
Well, it isn't about strict genetic determinism. It's not like your genes dictate your every move like a robot. The text explains that human nature actually comes in two forms.
Okay.
First, you have those universal traits. Think of them as like sliders on a massive sound mixing board in a recording studio.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah. So every single human comes factory equipped with the capacity for guilt, the thirst for social approval, the sense of reciprocal justice. Those sliders are universal.
But the sliders aren't glued in place at birth.
Exactly. The second part of human nature is this incredibly complex developmental program that actively tunes those knobs. It's constantly absorbing information from your early social environment and just adjusting the levels.
So the environment acts like the sound engineer. Let's say we're looking at the thirst for social approval slider. If a child grows up in a very secure environment where their needs are consistently met, parents are responsive, their developmental program might tune that social approval knob to a comfortable, moderate setting.
Right, so they grow up fairly self-assured.
But if a child grows up in a highly volatile or neglectful environment, natural selection has designed the brain to adapt to that harsh reality.
Yep. It might crank that social approval knob all the way up to a massively insecure setting.
Wow.
The brain is basically saying, hey, we are in danger of being abandoned here. We need to be hyper-vigilant to every single social cue. Because, in an ancestral environment, survival literally depended on pleasing the dominant members of the tribe.
So our differences aren't necessarily because we have wildly different genes. We have the same genetic developmental program. It's just responding to different environments.
Flexibility was the evolutionary advantage.
That is fascinating. And, if our early environment tunes these universal genetic sliders, it creates this incredible paradox when you look at the life of the man who discovered all of this, Darwin himself.
Oh, his own sliders were tuned in such a fascinating way. He was incredibly empathetic, which seems completely at odds with his brutal theory.
It's a massive contradiction. If you read The Origin of Species, natural selection is a bloodbath.
Total bloodbath.
It's this ruthless, violent competition for scarce resources, survival of the fittest. But Darwin himself, the man was famously, almost absurdly gentle.
He really was. He lived this quiet, secluded life in the English countryside. The text points out he actually dropped out of medical school in Edinburgh because he physically could not stomach the sight of surgery.
Well, and we have to remember, this was before chloroform existed.
Oh, gosh, right.
Surgery meant watching patients being physically restrained while fully conscious. Darwin was so highly empathetic that the suffering of others practically paralyzed him.
He even strongly considered becoming a clergyman. He read William Paley's Natural Theology, which was this book arguing that the intricate design of nature proved the existence of a benevolent creator.
Like finding a pocket watch on the ground proves there's a watchmaker.
Exactly. And Darwin initially loved that comforting idea. He was a decent, intensely moral man. He was prone to severe self-contempt if he even suspected he had wronged someone.
Which begs a very, very important question. If human beings are driven by a blind, mechanical process of ruthless genetic competition, why wasn't Charles Darwin a ruthless sociopath?
Why are any of us nice?
Right. If the engine of evolution runs on pure selfishness, why did it program us to care about strangers or feel guilt or build these cooperative societies?
So evolutionary psychologists address this through a crucial concept. It's called the naturalistic fallacy.
The naturalistic fallacy, okay.
It's the trap of looking at nature like, say, a lion viciously hunting down a gazelle and thinking, well, that is the natural order of things, so it must be good or right. Science tells us how the engine works, but it doesn't give us the driving directions for our morality.
Ah, I see.
Evolutionary biologist George Williams went so far as to call natural selection an evil process. I mean, it thrives on pain, starvation, profound selfishness.
So just because nature is brutal doesn't mean human society ought to be brutal.
Exactly. The great triumph of the human brain is that we can recognize the game we are programmed to play, and we can consciously decide not to play it.
We can opt out.
Right. Evolution gave us the capacity for empathy and cooperation because in a harsh prehistoric environment, those traits helped our small tribes survive. You share food with your neighbor today, they share with you tomorrow.
And we can take that localized tribal empathy and stretch it. We can choose to apply it to people across the globe who share none of our DNA.
And I should say, the source material is very careful to emphasize this neutrality. Modern Darwinian science is not an endorsement of any political or social policy.
Right, that's an important distinction.
In the past, distorted versions of this science, like social Darwinism, were weaponized. They were used to justify horrific racism, eugenics, predatory capitalism. But modern evolutionary psychology is strictly descriptive.
It just tells us what is.
Yes. It explains the origins of human nature. It does not dictate human values. The text actually notes how politically diverse these thinkers are. Robert Wright, who is one of the foundational theorists we'll discuss in a second, he actually co-authored an article with Huey Newton, the leader of the Black Panther Party, supporting their social causes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And other researchers in the field lean very conservative. The biological facts simply provide the map. We still choose the destination.
The science is the map, right. But Darwin himself actually had a massive blind spot on that map, didn't he?
Oh, a huge one.
He mapped out natural selection brilliantly, but because of his intensely moral, heavily constrained Victorian upbringing, he was completely baffled by the psychology of sex and romance.
He really was. I mean, he observed the mechanisms occurring across the animal kingdom perfectly. He noticed this nearly universal pattern that we call the asymmetry of sex.
The asymmetry of sex.
Yeah, in species after species, Darwin saw that the males are typically the ones competing aggressively for attention. They grow the massive stag horns, they display the bright peacock feathers, they puff up inflatable throat sacs.
Right, they do all the heavy lifting for attention.
Exactly. They fight each other, often to the death, just for the chance to display for the females.
They're the eager wooers.
And the females, conversely, are generally much more reticent. They are discerning, observant, and incredibly choosy about who they mate with.
And Darwin saw this imbalance everywhere, right? From beetles to birds to mammals. But he couldn't figure out the engine driving it. He didn't know why the males were always showing off and the females were holding back.
It wasn't until decades after his death that the puzzle was solved. And it started with a 1948 experiment by a British geneticist named A.J. Bateman.
Okay.
Bateman wanted to look at the mechanics of this asymmetry, so he ran a fascinating study using fruit flies. He placed male and female fruit flies into a glass chamber, let them interact freely, and painstakingly tracked who mated with whom and exactly how many offspring each individual fly produced.
He essentially hosted a microscopic dating reality show.
That is exactly what it was. And he discovered a hard mathematical rule. For the male fruit flies, their reproductive success was a straight upward line. The more females they mated with, the more offspring they produced.
So their genetic legacy was tied entirely to their volume of partners.
Exactly. But for the females, it was a completely different story. Mating with multiple males did not increase the female's number of offspring at all.
Wait, really?
Nope. Once a female fly was fertilized, her reproductive output hit a hard ceiling. It was capped by the physical number of eggs she could successfully produce and carry at one time.
Ah, okay. So if we think about this in terms of resources, it's kind of like an investment strategy.
Yes.
For the male fly, the biological cost of making a mistake is essentially zero. A sperm cell is incredibly cheap to produce. It's like buying a $2 lottery ticket.
Right.
If it doesn't pan out, who cares? You haven't lost much. Your best strategy is just to buy as many tickets as possible from as many different places as possible.
It's a high-volume, low-risk strategy.
But for the female, she's not buying a lottery ticket. An egg is biologically expensive. It's nutrient dense. And if we look at mammals, it's not just the egg, right?
Oh, far from it.
The gestation, the physical toll of pregnancy, the vulnerability to predators while pregnant, the massive calorie drain of lactation. She is funding a high-stakes 20-year startup venture.
That deduction perfectly mirrors the formal breakthrough made in 1972 by biologist Robert Wright. It's known as parental investment theory.
Parental investment theory.
Right. Travers realized that this psychological asymmetry starts at the cellular level. In fact, biology's official definition of a female organism is simply the one with the larger sex cells.
Oh, that's literally the definition.
Literally the definition. Eggs are large, rare, and heavily provisioned with nutrients. Sperm are microscopic, cheap, and mass-produced by the millions.
So because of that severe biological imbalance, natural selection wired the two sexes with completely different psychological tendencies.
It is entirely in the female's genetic interest to be highly discriminating. When calories are scarce in an ancestral environment, making a poor mating choice could literally mean starvation or death for her and her offspring.
The stakes are incredibly high.
So high. She's programmed to assume the burdens of reproduction only when circumstances are optimal and when the male partner shows clear signs of genetic fitness and, perhaps a willingness to stick around and provision resources.
While the male is under evolutionary pressure to constantly seek out new opportunities because every new partner is a chance to pass on his genes at almost no biological cost to himself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And well, this brings us to a common criticism of evolutionary psychology.
Right, because I can hear people listening right now saying, this sounds suspiciously like we're just creating a biological excuse for traditional 1950s gender roles.
It's a very common critique.
Darwin's critics call these just so stories. You look at a rigid Victorian society with its sexual double standards, and you conveniently invent a story about cavemen and cellular economics to justify it. How do we know this is actually hardwired in our genes and not just a cultural script we've all been taught through movies and religion?
That's a vital question.
Yeah.
You can't just look at Western industrialized societies to prove a universal human trait. You have to remove the cultural baggage.
Right.
And the text provides a brilliant cross-cultural test drawing on the anthropological work of Donald Simons and his analysis of the Trobriand Islanders.
The Trobriand Islanders, they live in Melanesia, right?
Yeah.
Completely isolated from Western moral traditions.
Yes. When anthropologists like Bronislaw Malinowski studied them early in the 20th century, they found a sexual culture that was radically different from anything in Europe.
In what way?
Premarital sex wasn't just tolerated, it was an active, encouraged part of their society. From early adolescence, both boys and girls were expected to experiment freely with a series of partners. There was zero cultural anxiety around virginity.
No purity rings, no shame attached to multiple partners.
None. A completely unrestricted, free love society.
So if the blank slate theory is right, and culture dictates everything about our emotions, their psychology around dating and sex should be totally unrecognizable to us.
But it wasn't. The underlying dynamic of parental investment still stubbornly held true. Malinowski observed that even in this environment of complete sexual freedom, the female Trobrianders consistently maintained a higher level of sexual reserve. They did not exhibit the indiscriminate eagerness of the males. Furthermore, in the course of every love affair, it was an established rule that the man constantly had to render payment. He had to give small presents and offerings to the woman.
So he still had to woo her. He had to demonstrate his ability to provide resources, even in a society where sex was freely available.
Even without the cultural conditioning of the West, the female's implicit biological value, the scarcity and sheer caloric cost of her reproductive capacity dictated the terms of engagement. The males still had to compete for her selective approval.
That is compelling, but, in science, the exception usually proves the rule.
Right.
If parental investment theory is truly a universal law of nature based purely on who invests the most resources, is there a scenario where the gender dynamic flips? Like, is there an animal where the male is the one funding the high-stakes startup venture and the female is buying the cheap lottery tickets?
Nature actually provides a perfectly elegant proof of this. We just have to look at species where the male makes the higher parental investment.
Okay, do we have an example?
The pipefish is a fantastic example.
The pipefish. That's a spindly little creature closely related to the seahorse, right?
Yep. And in their world, the male plays the role of the incubator.
Oh.
So the female pipefish produces the eggs, but she deposits them into a specialized pouch on the male's belly. He then literally plugs those eggs into his own bloodstream.
Wow.
He provides them with nutrition, oxygen, and he carries them, enduring the physical toll and the vulnerability to predators until they hatch.
So the male is taking on the massive biological cost. What happens to their behavior?
The psychology reverses perfectly.
Really?
Yes. In pipefish, the males are the coy, observant, choosy ones, and the females are the larger, more aggressive wooers who actively compete with each other for access to the males.
That is incredible.
You see the exact same phenomenon in certain bird species too, like the phalarope. The female phalarope lays the eggs in the nest and then she just takes off. The male is left to sit on the eggs, incubate them, raise the chicks.
Let me guess. The females are the flashy ones.
Predictably, female phalaropes are brightly colored, and they fiercely quarrel with one another to win over the drab, passive males.
So the pipefish and the phalarope literally prove that this behavior has nothing to do with some mystical masculine or feminine energy. It is a strict biological math problem. Whoever holds the most expensive biological real estate gets to dictate the terms of the market.
Exactly. And understanding that math is the first step to seeing the strings of the puppet master we talked about earlier, we are carrying around mental organs that were meticulously designed to maximize our genetic fitness.
Which brings us to the most important part of this whole deep dive, where you, the listener, actually live. We've talked a lot about our ancient software today, but we need to talk about the environment that software was originally designed for.
Oh, yes. Evolutionary psychologists call it the EEA, the environment of evolutionary adaptation.
The EEA. Our brains were exquisitely tuned over millions of years to survive in a very specific setting, right? Small, prehistoric hunter-gatherer villages. We evolved in tribes of maybe 50 to 150 people.
Right. Places where you knew every single face you saw, where encountering a stranger was a rare and potentially life-threatening event, where your social hierarchy was immediate, visible, and deeply tied to your daily survival.
We did not evolve to stand shoulder to shoulder with hundreds of complete strangers on a crowded subway platform.
No, we definitely didn't. We were not designed to live in massive, isolating suburban tracts where we don't even know the names of the people living 50 feet away from us.
And we certainly weren't designed to doom scroll through a glowing piece of glass, constantly comparing our own behind the scenes reality to the highly curated, impossibly perfect highlight reels of thousands of strangers around the globe.
The friction between our ancient software and our modern hardware is immense.
So look around your life today. If our emotional mixing board, our capacity for social anxiety, for jealousy, for the desperate need to fit in, was built to keep us alive in a harsh prehistoric village,
Yeah,
how many of your modern stresses aren't actually personal failures at all?
it's a great question.
What if your relationship conflicts or your chronic burnout are simply the inevitable result of trying to run an operating system built for the Pleistocene era in the bizarre, hyper-connected, deeply unnatural world of the 21st century?
Yeah.
It's something to think about the next time you feel a sudden pang of guilt or wonder why you care so much about what a stranger on the internet thinks of you.
It is a radically forgiving way to view our own human flaws.
It really is. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We'll see you next time.